This session is about the challenges of manufacturers, and what's not better than hearing the voice of the manufacturers and having also some UK manufacturers in the room, so that's really good. So we've heard a lot about big data, global data, UK data, and where that is heading to. We have received some flavors around the investment climate. I'm here today with Paul O'Donnell, Darren Spencer, Rachel Jones and Agnieszka Kisielewska, if I pronounce that right. Let me first allow you to introduce yourself. I think that will be helpful to the audience, and then we go into our discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, just about. My name is Darren Spencer. I'm the CEO of a company called Incinerate Limited. The company does very much what the name indicates. We manufacture incinerators. But we're very closely aligned with the humanitarian sector, and interesting to listen this morning that only around 12% of UK businesses export. Our business last year was 98% driven by export sales, so we're almost exclusively an export business. And because where we do business, we do an awful lot with United Nations, with WHO, Red Cross, but also military as well. Sustainability absolutely has to be at the centre of everything we do.
Super, thank you. Paul.
I'm Paul O'Donnell. I'm the Alliance Secretary of EAMA, which is the Engineering and Machinery Alliance. We're an umbrella body of 11 trade associations in the advanced manufacturing space. The trade associations represent sectors and subsectors that sometimes get missed off a little bit. So not the big sectors like aerospace or automotive, but people who are supplying complex machinery, complex industrial goods, componentry into a whole range of different advanced manufacturing supply chains. So we've got a really, really wide base. EAMA looks after their interests.
Agnieszka Kisielewska. I'm a trade lawyer and tax advisor from Poland. I speak today from the perspective of the EU, as I work for MDDP, which serves clients from around the world, also from the UK, and we can see a lot of interesting issues. I'm really glad I have this opportunity to share that with you today. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rachel Jones. I'm the founder of a tech business called Snapdragon. We fight fakes online, that is identifying infringements of intellectual property from counterfeits to infringing domains. I set the business up because a baby product that I invented 20 years ago was counterfeited as it hit its 52nd territory, and I was so cross I got on a plane and went to Alibaba and challenged them and learned what to do, came back resolved to build technology, raise money and build a team, and that's what we do. And Snapdragon exports, we're a service company, we're right at the top of that intellectual property services export. 60% of our clients are overseas, and we got a King's Award for International Trade last year. So exporting, yeah, absolutely, love it.
Good, thank you. So we have a wealth of experience here on the panel. Paul, maybe I'll start with you, because you represent the voice of many manufacturers also in this room. Do you think the UK needs a more comprehensive and competitive set of incentives to basically incentivize both domestic and international investment into the UK?
Thanks. Before I answer that question, I'm just going to pick up something that Chandu, our previous speaker, said, because I think it's really, really important when we're talking about, sitting here talking about manufacturing, and that's the connection between manufacturing and services. It's hugely important, and manufacturing drives a lot of service export, and vice versa, actually. And understanding those connections and that connectivity is really, really, really important, particularly in areas like professional services, business services, where the UK's export performance is and has been very, very strong. So I think that's a really, really important thing to say, that when we're talking about manufacturing, we are actually talking about services as well. In terms of manufacturing, there was a very, very good review that was published by, or commissioned and then published by the last government at the tail end of 2023, led by Richard Harrington, who is a Conservative peer. And that recommended a whole new regime and way of facilitating FDI, foreign direct investment. And we'd like to see a lot of that implemented. He was talking around things like a concierge service. He was talking about making the UK's landscape, which is or can look quite complicated. It looks quite complicated to us sometimes. If you're coming in from outside, it can look really, really complicated. Helping companies to understand what's out there, understand what different players do, what they're after, what they can't do sometimes as well, and giving that support to FDI. But actually, we'd also like to see some of those functions helped for companies that are already operating in the UK. Sometimes there is this model of FDI that it's this, a company has absolutely no connections whatsoever to a market and then decides to go and attack that market. That's not normally how FDI works. Companies have market there, they have customers there, they know people there, they know there's a parallel product there. There's all sorts of connections that may be there already. So understanding that it's a more complicated picture. Some of the things that need joining up and that need to be explained are the UK's planning system. Government has recently promised that there's a planning bill. This is going to apparently simplify that. Most of the conversation around that's been in terms of housing and freeing up more space for housing, which is fantastic and great. But actually, in the industrial sector, there are significant issues, and there are issues around, for example, what local authorities mean when they say industrial. So I know examples of companies who have wanted to put a advanced manufacturing factory, so not a dirty, great big steel mill, a modern, clean factory on a land that is supposed to be for industrial use, and they've been told by the local authority, sorry, when we said industrial, we actually meant warehousing. We didn't mean factory. So those sorts of challenges. We need a tax landscape, or people need to understand the tax landscape. I'll say something positive for a moment. The corporate tax roadmap that the government published at the tail end of last year, which essentially bedded in for the life of this parliament the corporation tax changes that the last government made, in particular around the annual investment allowance and full expensing, and made those permanent for the life of a parliament. That is really, really, really positive and really, really good, and puts the UK into best of class. And then I'll also quickly, because I can see you looking at me, Francesca, talk a little bit about the skills landscape as well. The UK skills landscape is incredibly fractured. It needs... Our businesses really do need support to navigate it. Domestic businesses need lots of support to navigate it. If you're coming in from the outside, you really need that support and that help. And we need to put something in place there. And then related to that, the innovation landscape. And I think Darren's going to say a little bit about that in a minute. But it's a really, really strong area in the UK. We've got some fantastic innovative companies, innovative research institutions, not just universities. But understanding where those strengths are and unlocking them can be quite difficult. So that's where I think the support needs to be better.
Okay, that's very helpful. Can you give a little bit of an insight of what support the smaller companies, the SMEs, need? And they basically can provide very niche equipment into the larger household names, and we're looking at big picture. What do they really need, and what do they need today to attract that investment, importantly also in the SME segment?
It's difficult, or it's dangerous to generalise about what all small companies need, because every company is different. Every company has different products. They have different ways of working. They have different operating models. They have different ownership structures. But I think if I was going to say one thing, I think it's information. And I think it's knowing and understanding where there are opportunities that they can take advantage of. And that can be, so I think there is a role for government there. There is also, I'm going to give a shameless plug to trade associations there. But there is also a role for a lot of the people who are out in the exhibition area, around banks, financial service providers, accountants as well, really, really, really important. Quite often, actually, the only professional advice that an SME has is its accountant. And I think there's a massively important role there. But getting access to as much information as possible, and then having a little bit of time, a little bit of headspace almost, to process some of that information and to think a little bit more strategically about a company. Because if you're running an SME, it's a 24/7 or 25/8 job, and actually taking that little bit of time to think strategically about your business, I think is really, really important. And if you've got the information to do that, and it's more easy for you to access that, you may have the time.
Okay, I think that provides a nice bridge, Rachel, to you, because you've set up 2 companies. One was a manufacturing company, one is the one you're running right now is much more of a tech company. How important is it, the information that Paul alludes to? And when it comes to the approach of innovation, including the role of AI and automation, how important is it, and where do you see that going?
Thanks very much. No, I believe in innovation totally and utterly. And when it comes to AI, well, where do you start, really? I mean, in the supply chain, it's all about just improving efficiency, reducing costs, and building resilience. We've all been talking about resilience, and my God, do we need resilience in the market today? AI improves forecasting, for analysis, for stock levels, for warehousing, for all of these kind of things. But collaboration for me in the supply chain is absolutely key. And given I spend my life looking for counterfeits in the supply chain, then collaboration and honesty are absolutely right up there. And AI will also look around the risks and mitigation for this. So, if somebody says to you, your boat's on your way from A to B and it stopped in Singapore, I wasn't expecting it to stop in Singapore. How long was it there? Well, it was long enough for your stock to be taken off the boat and to be mingled with stock which isn't genuine, and to be put back on the boat and to arrive somewhere else. And these are the kind of questions actually you don't get answers to unless you have these conversations with people and you actually say, have you thought about this? So AI is crucial. And from the point of view of what Snapdragon does when we're analysing and scraping marketplaces absolutely every day, the first thing is that you will all know, and I'm not teaching my granny to suck eggs, that intellectual property is territorial. So if I'm using intellectual property to protect my product, I need to have IP in the territory where I need to protect it. So when you're exporting, you need to have IP in your home territory and in the territories that you want to go to. But if you don't have it in China and you suddenly decide you want to go to China, then somebody in China may own your IP and you're trying to export something and you can't because somebody else owns the IP and the product's impounded and destroyed and you've lost potentially millions of dollars worth of stock. So I think, collaboration and awareness and resilience are right up there. And when I'm looking online for products which have been ripped off or domains that have been ripped off, then AI is utterly crucial because we're training every single model to look for images. We're looking for text in images, for images in text, all that kind of thing. And it just improves efficiency and enables the bad actors to be removed really quickly and efficiently.
Okay, and you've talked about the communication, the information, the AI with that, and then you had to jump on a plane to basically get your right and ensure that your product couldn't be counterfeited anymore. What is the biggest recommendation you give your clients these days when they want to export and they want to protect their intellectual property outside of basically the data?
Well, I think recognising what IP you have is absolutely crucial, and Paul and I were talking earlier on that isn't always obvious. Companies have IP within their business, which is very much part of kind of trade secrets and know-how. That's still part of your IP, which you need to protect. And bits which can be protected, trademarks, design rights, patents, and copyright can be protected. Copyright isn't registered unless you're in the US and going to court, but it can be protected. So if your website is ripped off, and your images and your words can be taken down under the Berne Convention, which is copyright law. So what I always say to people when you're exporting is recognise what your IP is, register it as fast as you can, and if you see it being infringed, absolutely get on it. Get on it. Don't sit about and wonder. Just because you've got a domain name, just because you've got a limited company name with in the name of your business, if you haven't got a trademark and somebody tries to rip you off, you're screwed, basically. So you really need to protect your IP before you go international. That is my biggest bit of advice.
Okay, I think you're going to be very popular after this panel. I know there's a few startups here. Someone talked to me earlier this morning about having registered an IP and basically looking at investment. So I'm sure people will come to you. Maybe back to Paul then. When we look at advanced manufacturing, how important is the UK industrial strategy to boost the economic growth and competitiveness? and that that industrial strategy has been postponed. We're expecting that, I think, later this month. But how important is that for your members to fine-tune their strategies?
Okay. The industrial strategy is going to be focused on 8 sectors, of which advanced manufacturing is one. And there are several other sectors, clean energy and defence in particular, that have got significant elements of advanced manufacturing to it. I think it's really, really important that the attitude or the approach that government takes to sectors is broad-based and looks at the supply chain as part of a sector. If their attitude is the automotive, for example, the automotive sector is the 8 companies that assemble cars in the UK. That is not that's not a strategy that will actually bite deep into the economy. It won't help the, if you like, the deep economy. It won't help the supply chains. They need to recognise that if you're going to take a sectoral model, it has got to go deep and it needs to be cross-sectoral, because the landscape that modern advanced manufacturing, as with so many other sectors, is really, really, really complicated. It's not a simple linear. Company A supplies company B, supplies company C, sells to the consumer. There is feedback loops. There's company D doing something. There's a design house doing. There are all sorts of different inputs. It's one of those points about a lot of those companies that are supplying are in fact service companies. As I said, manufacturing design houses. That's a service industry. Recognising that will be really, really important. It's also incredibly important that it's cross-governmental. If this is just the Department of Business's industrial strategy, it won't get traction. It needs to have full Treasury buy-in. It needs to have buy-in from Department for Net Zero. It needs to have DSIP buy-in. It needs to have MOD buy-in in order to make that work as well as it could. In terms of a couple of things that we've got on the shopping list, skills again. There was an announcement, extra 1.2 billion a year for adult skills in the spending review. It was announced yesterday. That's an okay number, I think. But how that's spent and how that is made available to companies and making sure that they are able to deploy that in the best possible ways, not funneling companies down particular approved routes, and some of the sort of conversations that have been had with government recently around sort of fast-track apprenticeships and things like that. That's not really what we need in advanced manufacturing. We are a really, really high skill, and high-wage industry, but giving companies the flexibility to spend that money, much of which has been collected through what was the apprenticeships levy is now going to be the skills and growth levy. So companies think this is their money. I mean, it's not. It's just Treasury put a selective employment tax and called it a levy. But that money needs to be filtered into companies, and companies need to have the ability to spend it appropriately. We'll also quickly flag up energy prices. Somebody, I think it was the previous speaker actually mentioned that's potentially a benefit from the UK-EU reset. But actually we need to see support for, and support for companies outside, that there is already support for what are called sort of energy intensive users, people who make steel or paper is an incredibly intensive, energy intensive process. That needs to go much wider into through the manufacturing sector, because the numbers are really, really, really bad in terms of energy costs, certainly industrial electricity costs in the UK, and we need help on that. And then finally, making sure that the strategy is long-term and embedded and speaks to a stable business environment. The UK has not been the world's most stable environment over the last 7, 8, 9 years. we need to get that stability back. We need to be boring again, because there are plenty of other places in the world that are really not boring at the moment. And if we want to attract capital, if we want to attract places to that stable long-term investment environment, we need to have a strategy that gets buy-in.
Okay, that's very helpful. So maybe, Darren, we move over to you, and maybe you as a manufacturer, you can explain if that strategy is relevant for you, to what extent it is relevant. And you export more than 95% to all kind of markets, difficult markets, challenging markets. And then we had the tariffs and all the uncertainty. How important is the industrial strategy, and give us an impression of what you've gone through as a key exporting company over the last 2 months, please?
Yes, okay. So with so much of our business being export, and we're competing against overseas competitors. So, and I completely agree with the comments that innovation really has to be one of the key differentiators for UK manufacturers. By definition, if you're not innovating, you're actually going backwards, because the rest of the world is going to be innovating while you're not. And for us, and I think that links very closely for us with sustainability as well. For a long time, sustainability, I mean, just to give a bit of context to the business I operate, we're very much in that SME space. We're a single site operation, 50 employees. So this is not a voice of corporate. This is a voice of SME. Being able to use innovation to evidence that your business is operating in a sustainable way, it's not just an ethical choice, it's also becoming permission to play. And I think it's also one of the big opportunities UK manufacturers have to differentiate and win. There are some fantastic schemes available in the UK to support innovation, whether it be through human resource apprenticeship schemes or academic institutions that can support manufacturing. I think my personal experience embracing that in the last few months is it needs to become far less complex. I think for an SME, and a good point Paul made actually, is often your sole source of advisory is your accountant. And when you actually start to embrace this world, it can be quite daunting. So to make some of these schemes and resources more accessible and really actionable for SME businesses, they need to be far less complex, far more accessible, and communicated far more effectively.
Okay, and your product, if I may say, is made in the UK.
That is correct.
100% for export. What do you think about that strategy, made in the UK to export, and how important is that going forward?
It's very much at the centre of our strategy. I mean, in terms of our actions to be sustainable, I mean, things we can do. So we make incinerators. So by virtue of that, we make a product that does have a byproduct that is not green. So how can we counter that? Well, we can counter that by designing sustainability into our product. We can do that by using renewable materials. We can actually build sustainability into the performance of the product. But also, we focus an awful lot on our supply chain. We're very focused on onshoring. We keep our supply chain very close to home because we think that's a real impact on our green impact. And we find that is very, very key for our value proposition, because we're selling to the humanitarian sector. So we are selling to sectors that are having to report on ESG. So having that at the centre of what we do, we find critical to our success.
And that's very helpful. Just if I may, I'm back on tariffs, and I'm speaking to a lot of clients from a banking perspective. We're collecting a lot of feedback from SMEs, from mid-market, from large corporates on what the last 2 months of impact and uncertainty means for the business. And we spoke a little bit before this panel around, designing your strategies, having multiple strategies, but not really implementing something yet, which we hear from a lot of our clients. How's that for you? Because you export to so many different countries. How do you respond as a manufacturer?
It's extremely challenging. I mean, as a little small business in the Northwest, we've exported to over 180 countries. On this very topic, I was at a dinner of a cohort of 8 CEOs last week, and that question was being posed. What do we do as manufacturers to counter the challenge of tariffs? And some of the things being presented, Do we devolve our supply chains to be more diverse? If the US is a key market, do you devolve your supply chain to be in North America? Also, do you off-site your manufacturing? I think the general consensus was, as businesses, we absolutely have to be making contingency plans, but the general advice is you cannot implement them right now. How can you implement a strategy to counter the actions of somebody who doesn't know what he's doing when he gets up tomorrow morning? And it's a bit of a sort of humorous comment, but it's such an unstable, changeable dynamic in terms of international trade and tariffs right now. I think you literally just have to be on the right tires for how the circuit is right now, using an F1 analogy. You just have to be very agile.
Yeah, indeed, and a good level of pragmatism as well. I think that came through in the previous conversations. So then maybe Agnieszka, we go to you. And we've heard already that accountants, tax advisors, they are critical for businesses to navigate, to understand what's happening. To what extent have rules around customs, excise duties, and VAT posed problems for businesses navigating the business landscape today?
From the perspective of the EU and the UK relation, we still feel the impact of Brexit. This is one point. We see that the business would love to have the single market and, from the excise duty, common EMCS system and no customs struggle, but we cannot provide that. We need to focus on seamless trade, and from the perspective of advisory, our main struggle is, of course, origin of goods, and this is something we cannot skip. We should focus on that. This is like first one, and the other one in general is data sharing. This is my mantra, really. We need to be more focused on data sharing and provide business like SMEs, big business. They all rely on their IT systems now. And to move forward the trade agenda, we need to be, more future-proof with building the communication with customs authorities and tax authorities as well. E-invoicing is a very trendy topic these days, but I always stress out that we do need communication with single window communication with customs authorities, and now we are closing our EU presidency as Poland, and our priority was to move forward the reform, the customs reform, which is relying on EU Customs Data Hub in the future. So EU Customs Data Hub will be replacing over 100 systems now, being live in all EU member states. You can see the struggle, relying on over 100 customs systems running up in different EU countries. And with this perspective, I believe we should invite UK to the table and discuss jointly how to move forward the trade between UK and EU on the level of data sharing. And once again, for SMEs, it is the vital issue. SMEs would love to rely on AI, on really advanced IT systems, and just exchange data, not to engage additional people, outsourcing. Of course, it seems like not the best option for my industry, but it isn't. I believe AI can move us forward to better future for that perspective, and we definitely need to move from the Middle Ages, approach of exchanging documents, because these days, actually, if you need to produce an invoice, what you should do, you take your data from your IT system, and you need to pay more for the visualization of this document, and then you need to send that to your customs agency, your customs broker, and then they move forward to customs authority. You can see how many steps and how many, burdensome issues are related with that. Replacing this with, EU Customs Data Hub or Data Hub covering EU and UK trade seamlessly, I believe will skip a huge part of the cost now being included in the trade.
Okay. And the role of the regulator in that, is that very important in these changes and centralizing it all?
I think we need to regulate more and more issues with a common perspective, because we don't need to fight with each other and compete with each other on ideas. We can join forces on being more stable and being more focused on like real-time data sharing, etc. That's why we need a common agenda and share experiences, I guess, also for the regulatory part.
Okay, that's helpful. Maybe if we go back to what you started with, where you help your clients, is with the origin of goods. Can you give a little bit of insight on how you support your clients there? Because that's very relevant these days. Where do those goods actually originate, and how are they then taxed, tariffed, etc.?
Of course, the main struggle is proper knowledge, and for SMEs, like a typical accountant cannot advise you with this complicated regulation of origin of goods. For example, you need to engage trade lawyers, and we are of course assisting. For example, my team is assisting like family-owned Ukrainian businesses and small, medium-sized Polish businesses, and I think the struggle is the same. Like from the Polish and the UK perspective, we need to know what kind of rule is applicable here. This is one. We need to collect all data, all information. So you mentioned communication is very important. Then you need to know how to use this rule, and at the end of the day, you need to issue proper documents, which is really easy on the post-Brexit agenda. But overall, it's not easy at all, because we are importing a lot of materials from, for example, US, China, other parts of the world, and then we need to calculate, and we need to analyze how the process provides the value added on the EU side or UK side, and how we should rely on that. Of course, I mentioned Ukraine. This is our, very close neighbor, and we can see the ambition to join the EU and the ambition to be more included more and more in the framework of common, understanding of the free trade and also, origin of goods. So from this perspective, still post-Brexit agenda needs to be very careful on providing information, and remember that SMEs in particular needs assistance, but also surprisingly huge multinationals are not that much compliant with that, and this can be surprising, but yes, it impacts a lot of trade.
Yeah, thank you. And it doesn't surprise me. We've spoken a lot about the movement of goods, the origins of goods now. We haven't spoken a lot about services. It's incredibly important for the UK, also to the manufacturing, the advanced manufacturing sector, Paul, as you mentioned. Rachel, with Snapdragon and the focus on IP and basically supporting companies to protect their goods for counterfeits. Do you have a view as well on the services industry and the creative industry and how they can protect themselves?
Well, I think it's increasingly difficult, and have we not just seen lots of comment about the creative industries being protected and the issues with AI? I think one has to do what one can with what one's got, which is kind of basically life, isn't it? I think copyright you need to really protect as much as you possibly can, and this is an issue currently with the creative industries, and we shouldn't let AI be trained on what people are creating and making their money from. I think this is a big issue, and I'm right there with Elton John on that one. But I think it's increasingly difficult with AI, to be perfectly honest. But I think when you are a service industry exporting, as I am, we protect what we can. We do what we can with what we've got. And I think that's really the best thing you can do. And what you can't do, and I would like just to add this if I could, but it's going back to being a physical product and looking after yourself at customs. But if you are moving product through territories, a brilliant thing to do if you have a physical product is to register an application for action with customs, which will cover all 27 member states and the UK in a separate one, and it's free to do it, and it's translated into 27 languages, and basically you can register your product and it will be looked out for at when the product is moving around through states. If there's a counterfeit coming in, it might well be seized, and that's free, so that kind of goes along supporting what you were saying. But I think it's increasingly difficult for the service industry, so you really need to get in there with knowing what your know-how is and your trade secrets and the way you do things.
Thank you. Then if we move to the topic of sustainability, and we have a lot of services companies focusing on sustainability and advancing that agenda. Maybe Paul, first to you. What role do you think UK manufacturers have to play in helping customers meeting their sustainability goals, particularly in this challenging environment with so many potentially conflicting priorities?
I think in terms of meeting your sustainability goals, it's going to differ from industry to industry or sector to sector and company to company. And again, I'll go back to that point about information, and because the sustainability goals of a particular company can be very diverse. It's not just energy use; it's material use. It's how you how you do particular processes. Providing that information to your customer, giving them a sight of that. And actually probably bringing them on that journey with you as well when you're thinking about how you manufacture something and how helping them understand what's in their product, particularly when you're thinking about the sorts of sustainability goals that have to be reported on. So that information flow is really, really important, and that can be done in a whole range of different sorts of ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be written up or reported on. You could do sort of real-time reporting on things. You can connect up different companies' IT systems so that they have an understanding of what's going on within their supply chain, within their value chain. So I probably really focus on the information piece.
Thank you. And maybe then, Darren, back to you. And you touched upon sustainability already a little bit, and you're exporting often into disaster zones where there are conflicts, and often your clients need your incinerators at the very last minute, but those clients have their sustainability goals. They might not have the time and the opportunity to review within time pressures. How do you support your clients still meeting these and the brand you have built around your sustainable products?
It really has to be at the centre of everything we do, and it starts with product design. You start with sustainability at the heart of what you do. So when you design your product, you try to do so with renewable and recyclable materials. But picking up the point that Paul made, you then expand that to your supply chain. Make sure your supply chain is transparent, is operating in a environmentally and sustainable way, because your customers, even in these challenging environments, will need to know that. But then also, it's back to the word innovation again. Make sure that your product's embracing innovation, because if I use an example of us where we're operating in very challenging environments, what matters to those customers? Often raw materials or fuels are scarce, difficult to come by. So make your products very efficient, make them very easy to operate, that make them very design longevity into them by very nature of having products that can operate long term and are easy to repair. This actually all builds into the long-term sustainability of the product to the customer, even in those really challenging environments.
Okay, and maybe that then leads us into questions, and I can see the first question. The UK government's commitment to net zero has significant implications for most, if not all, of the UK manufacturers. Would you say it is perhaps a prohibitor of growth in an already challenging environment? Paul, may I invite you to the question?
I don't think it's a prohibitor of growth. I think it's potentially an inhibitor of growth. I'd say a couple of things about that, in response to that question. The UK's government commitment to net zero is an opportunity as well in terms of developing new low-carbon industries and low-carbon energy generation industries. It's and also an opportunity in terms of using innovation and technology to take energy use and carbon out of supply chains. So things like lightweighting for aircraft, which is something the UK is very, very, very good at. So I think there's opportunities there. However, I did flag up earlier energy prices, and I make no apologies for doing that. The UK's industrial energy prices are appalling. Actually, the government's commitment to net zero is not the main contributor to that. The UK's energy market is completely broken in lots and lots of different ways, including in the way in its decoupling from the European market. So I don't think that some of the net zero implications that we have on energy prices help. So I think inhibitor is correct, but I do think it's a slightly bigger picture than is sometimes portrayed.
Okay, well, I take the positives. It's a massive opportunity. Then, Rachel, I think if I go to question 3, because that's very much directed at you. As a young British manufacturer starting to sell globally, at what point of the journey do you start protecting your intellectual property?
Thank you for the question. So it depends on what what it is that you have. As soon as possible would be my answer, really. But if you have a patent or you're looking to patent something, it's incredibly expensive. And the thing about a patent is that you can't actually declare what you're doing if you're actually going to file the patent. So you have to kind of be secret for a very long time. I'm really happy to take this offline and explore it with you. But the basic answer is as soon as you possibly can.